In this video, I'm going to talk about pregnancy, primary aldosteronism, and adrenal CTNNB1 mutation. Definition. Primary aldosteronism is a type of hormonal disorder in which one or both adrenal glands produce too much aldosterone. The word primary means that the condition is caused by a problem in the adrenal glands. Problems outside of the adrenal glands can also lead to too much aldosterone, but these conditions are called secondary hyperaldosteronism. The aldosterone produces adeno harbors activity mutation of CTNNB1, encoded in the WNT cells differentiation pathway, and they express LHCGR and HNRHR, encoding gonadal receptors at levels that were more than 100 times as high as the level in other adrenals producing adenomas.
Hyperaldosteronism refers to an endocrine disorder where the adrenal gland produces above normal levels of the hormone aldosterone. Now, there are two adrenal glands, one above each kidney. And each one has an inner layer called the medulla and an outer layer called the cortex, which is subdivided into three more layers: the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The outermost layer is the zona glomerulosa, and it's full of cells that make the hormone aldosterone. Aldosterone is part of a hormone family, or axis, which work together and are called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Together, these hormones decrease potassium levels, increase sodium levels, and increase blood volume and blood pressure. Aldosterone is secreted in response to elevated levels of renin, and its role is to bind to receptors on two types of cells along the distal convoluted tubule of the nephron. First, it stimulates the sodium-potassium ion pumps of the principal cells to work even harder. These pumps drive potassium from the blood into the cells, and from there it flows down its concentration gradient into the tubule to be excreted as urine. At the same time, the pumps drive sodium in the opposite direction, from the cell into the blood, which allows more sodium to flow from the tubule into the cell, down its concentration gradient. Since water often flows with sodium through a process of osmosis, water also moves into the blood, which increases blood volume and therefore blood pressure. The other function of aldosterone is to stimulate the proton ATPase pumps in alpha intercalated cells, which causes more protons to get excreted into the urine. Meanwhile, ion exchangers on the basal surface of the cell move the negatively charged bicarbonate ion into the extracellular space, causing an increase in pH.
Application. Clinically, primary aldosteronism during pregnancy is perilous of both mother and fetus, as shown by recent cases of overlooked primary aldosteronism, resulting in delivery in an infant who has small gestational age. Prevision of a molecular explanation will help to increase awareness of aldosterone-produced adenomas as a probable cause of the hypertension, hyperkalemia on both early in pregnancy.
Hyperaldosteronism leads to hypokalemia, which is low potassium levels in the blood, as well as hypernatremia, high sodium levels in the blood. With more sodium around in the blood, water moves into the blood vessels, which results in a high blood volume and high blood pressure, or hypertension. Finally, the loss of protons also results in an alkalosis, and more specifically a metabolic alkalosis, since it's caused by the kidneys. Individuals with hyperaldosteronism typically develop hypertension-related symptoms, like headaches and facial flushing, as well as hypokalemia-related symptoms, like constipation, weakness, and potentially changes in their heart rhythm. The diagnosis of hyperaldosteronism is mainly done by measuring levels of renin and aldosterone. In primary hyperaldosteronism, the main problem is that the zona glomerulosa cells secrete high levels of aldosterone, And that aldosterone has a negative feedback effect on renin, and so it actually inhibits renin production. So in this case, aldosterone levels are high and renin levels are low. In secondary hyperaldosteronism, on the other hand, the main problem is that there's too much renin produced by the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidneys. So even though aldosterone's inhibiting renin secretion, renin production is still being stimulated by those cells. And this means that there's both high levels of aldosterone and high levels of renin.
Pros and cons. Cons. Mutations are predicted to affect a GASK3 phosphorylation consensus motif and will thus impair cadence degradation and up-regulate canonical WNT activity as a result of elevation levels of activity catenin. Traduction of granulosa cells with a constitutively activity cation mutation leads to an increase in LHCGR mRNA expression by a factor of 3. Pro. The production of aldosterone is latent until the aberrant gonadal reports are stimulated by the pregnancy hormones. The influence of catenin on LHCGR was anticipated on the basis of experiments of granulosa cells of the pre-ovulatory follicle, where catenin activates the LHCGR promoter together with the transcription of the factor SF1 and TCF3.
Hyperaldosteronism can happen due to primary causes, which is where the adrenal gland itself is responsible for the excess production of aldosterone. The most common primary cause is called idiopathic hyperaldosteronism, because the zona glomerulosa has an increase in the number of cells secreting aldosterone, but it's not really clear why this happens. The second most common cause is called Conn syndrome, and this is where an adenoma or tumor in the glandular epithelial cells secrete too much aldosterone. A third cause is familial hyperaldosteronism, and this is a genetic condition that runs in families, and it's where the zona glomerulosa cells inappropriately make aldosterone in response to adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is secreted by the pituitary gland. And this is in addition to responding to renin as normal.
Issues in Ecuador. Recent discovery of somatic mutation permit to recognize of subtypes of aldosterone producing adenos with distinct clinical presentation and pathological features.
Hyperaldosteronism can also be due to secondary causes, where the pathology lies outside the adrenal gland. Secondary causes of hyperaldosteronism are usually due to excess aldosterone production in response to high levels of renin. This might happen when there's a chronic decrease in blood pressure, like in congestive heart failure or cirrhosis. Treatment of hyperaldosteronism is usually with potassium-sparing diuretics, especially spironolactone, which competitively binds to aldosterone receptors on the principal and alpha intercalated cells. With these medications around, aldosterone can't exert its effects. Additionally, treating the underlying cause can also be helpful. For example, in Conn syndrome, surgical removal of the tumor can help, and also managing heart failure and cirrhosis. Alright, as a quick recap, hyperaldosteronism is the chronic excess secretion of aldosterone from the zona glomerulosa cells of the adrenal gland. And these high aldosterone levels can lead to hypokalemia, hypernatremia, hypertension, and a metabolic alkalosis.
Conclusion. Adrenal cells renewal is thought to occur through the amplification, centripetal migration, and differentiation of initial undifferentiated subcapsular mesenchymal progenitor cells, I conclude that the three mutations affect the catein in aldosterone producing adenomas, which we describe here activities adrenal production by unleashing the ability of these adrenal progression cells to switch agonal genes. The production of aldosterone is limited until the avert gonadal reports are stimulated by pregnancy hormones.